What is up, night crawlers? Welcome back to the Nightmare's Edge. First, I want to apologize if you notice a change in my sound. My computer decided it no longer wished to live, so I'm being forced to continue using my laptop. Thank you for your patience and understanding. That being said, thank you all for being here, and I hope you're ready for the second part of the Ancient Tower series, written by FishermanTales. If you haven't checked out the story yet, the link will be listed in the description. Now onto the story. This week, I have the amazingness of Lady Nopeingham and Darek Weber Scary Stories. And returning this week will be SomberPuppet as a wafty voice. If you haven't checked out their channels, please do so. They're going to be listed in the description. Check them out, show them some love. Now, without any further ado, please sit back, relax, and let me tickle those inner fears. Metal on metal. There was a sizzle as the heated piece was submerged into water. My movements were slow and careful. I was oiled head to toe in blood. It dripped from me onto the stone steps. The hammering continued. The sound grew louder as I descended further. The air was becoming warmer. I reached another door, not wooden like the others, but more like an iron prison gate. Still, no knobs or handles. No keyhole. Beyond the gate, I observed a hazy stone chamber lit by a faint reddish glow. A large figure hammered onto a piece that they held steady on the surface of an anvil. Sparks danced around them with each strike as embers escaped from burning coals. I placed my hand on the gate and it creaked open. Another sizzle. I inched closer as the figure drowned the object in a stone tub. The gate drifted shut behind me. Closer, and I could see in the glow a broad-shouldered man dressed in rags, dirty with soot and sweat, hair long like all the others but thinning on top, blondish in color. He brought the object up for air. It dripped red. A blacksmith that cooled his creations in blood. He tossed it onto a pile of similar pieces. I looked around and did not see an obvious way out of the room and down to the next level. I opened my mouth to speak but hesitated. I did not know if this was friend or foe. "I need to get to the next level," I said. I ditched hello, excuse me, this didn't feel like the type of place for any of those. The hammering halted and the man pivoted to face me. He had a long beard like the rest, something I came to assume was a reflection of how much time they had been imprisoned. He was wild-eyed and looked as if he were both startled and angered by my intrusion.
"Who are you?"
he grunted. His hammer trembled beneath a white-knuckled grip. I held my hands in front of me to show that I did not mean him harm. "I need to get to the next level." He raised the hammer and stomped towards me.
"I ask you a question."
I flinched and stumbled backward. "Nate, my name is Nate."
"Why do you need to get down to the next level?"
he asked, his hammer still firmly gripped. I need to get out of here." His eyes became less wide and his brow narrowed.
"And you think the way out is down?"
He lowered his hammer and coughed out a laugh. He turned back to his forge.
"There is no way out."
"He calls for me." The man stopped moving. He spun around to face me again.
"Then you've chosen to answer his summons?"
"I'll be trapped in here otherwise."
"Do you not fear that a worse fate may await you?"
I had considered it. I knew that the one responsible for the nightmare could be nothing less than pure evil. But I needed to understand why he called for me. I needed to know who he was. And most importantly, I needed to try and get back to Hannah, even if that meant traveling to the depths of hell to get my ticket back to the surface. I nodded. "It's a chance I'm willing to take." The man sighed a low grumble.
"Then I wish you luck, Nate."
He returned to his forge and continued his work. I still had unanswered questions. Who was this man? What was he forging? Why was he doing it? And how was I to get to the next level? I moved behind him and peered over his shoulder as he brought the hammer down on the object. He was making the blade of a sword. Why do you make those? I asked.
I dream of battle.
He answered as he struck the blade again. Will you use these blades?
It is a cruel punishment for a warrior to be given the means to prepare for a war that he cannot fight.
Then why do it? The man stopped hammering.
Do you not hear it?
We stayed still without moving or speaking. I heard the crackle of the heated coals, the beating of my own heart, the breathing of the powerful figure in front of me. But there were other sounds too, distant, but present nonetheless. Ones that made my blood run cold. Frantic voices of men fighting a losing battle, as others cried out in excruciating agony. The ripping of flesh and the snapping of bones, the metallic clang of fallen blades, and the ravenous snarl of something inhuman.
That beast cannot be bested, not by man. That is their punishment, to fight a losing battle for eternity.
I now understood. He worked the forge to drown out the horrible sound of the endless defeat. But the pile of blades was smaller than one would expect. Do they use weapons down there? The prisoner struck the blade with more force.
Yes.
He hit it once again, just as hard. The weapons that you make. Sparks flew as the prisoner brought the hammer down on the blade with all of his strength and frustration, causing the head to break free from its wooden handle. His gaze fell to the floor, and his wide shoulders slumped.
Those which I forge are gathered by his demons and given to my people to wield hopelessly.
Why do they continue to fight if there's no hope of winning?
It is all they have.
I wondered why someone so drained of hope wouldn't use the blades he made to kill himself. Can nobody die in this tower?
Any man cannot kill us, nor can we succumb to age or illness. But of those to whom we were once equal, we are vulnerable. We had always been able to kill each other, some more easily than others. Those days have ended, though, as we are no longer equals. That which made us so has been taken from us. They can kill us, but we cannot do the same to them.
And they choose to resurrect those they kill for the sake of eternal torment? The prisoner nodded. I want to help end this, I said.
You're just a man.
But I can descend the tower freely.
And what is your point?
I will look for a dune. The prisoner's expression grew somber. His eyes narrowed.
What do you know of Idun?
The man above us said that she holds the key. The prisoner glanced at the stone ceiling.
What did this man look like?
He was old and gray and missing his right eye. The prisoner's jaw tensed.
My father.
He exhaled and relaxed a bit.
How is he?
He helped me out of a pool of blood into his rowboat. He spoke of you and your brothers, said he has not seen you in a long time. The prisoner nodded and changed the topic.
Idun's apples are what gives us our strength and vitality. Without it, we become weak.
I looked at the large, muscular figure in front of me. You do not look weak.
I am only as strong as a man now.
Other prisoners do not look as healthy as you.
I eat what I am given, and I work the forge. That is the only reason I do not look as they do.
What food are you given? The prisoner was silent. His eyes flicked towards the floor, but his gaze was distant. I understood. How do I get to the next level? I asked. He regained his focus.
There is a door in the floor.
He crossed over to a large stone hatch, barely perceptible aside from the faint outline.
I cannot open it.
I nodded. I can. I knelt and placed my palms against the door. It began to vibrate and then slid open, revealing a narrow spiral staircase. I stood up. I suppose you won't be joining me. The prisoner smirked.
I wish I could.
I reached out to shake his hand. He gripped mine and pulled me close.
My father is correct about Aidan, though her apples do nothing for a man.
He pulled me even closer, seemingly staring into my soul.
But I can see now that you are more.
I did not know what to say. I was just a man trying to get back to his wife. He released me, stepped over to his forge, and then grabbed something and brought it back over. He held out a magnificently crafted sword, one that was different from all the others.
The prophets always said you'd return, but I'd begun to doubt them.
He handed me the sword.
I made this for you long ago.
I took the sword from him, and in my hands, it felt right. I don't know who you think I am, but thank you, I said.
Before that blade can be useful, you must find Aidan's apples and eat one. Then you will become as you were.
I stepped down the stairs. I could hear the chaos below. I tightened my grip on the sword.
If he summons you, then his beasts and demons will not harm you. But once you eat the apple, they will try,
said the prisoner. Then why bother eating it?
You must eat the apple if we are to have a chance.
I nodded and continued down the steps. They began to vibrate as the stone hatch started to slide shut above me. I stopped and turned to the prisoner who was still watching me. Wait, I said. What is your name? He peered down at me through the shrinking gap and at the last moment said,
My name is Thor.
The door slid shut overhead, casting the stairwell into darkness. Had I heard the prisoner correctly? Thor? I shook the nonsense from my head. Maybe his name was Thor, but that didn't mean he was the Norse god, right? I gripped the sword given to me and turned down the narrow, spiraling stairwell. It was dimly lit. I kept my palm pressed against the wall to help guide myself down the dizzying spiral. The chaos from earlier was now quiet. Oddly enough, I found this more concerning. Was the beast waiting for me? Further down the spiral, I began to feel the air of a room well acquainted with death, an environment that had become saturated with pain and desperation, and ultimately, defeat. The sword trembled in my hand. I held it ready as if I were able to use it, but Thor had said that it would be useless until I'd eaten one of Idun's apples. An apple? Had I not already observed the things within the tower, I would have laughed at the notion of an apple being more than fruit. As the stairwell opened to the next chamber, I could see the glint from the lit torches reflecting off puddles of blood. And in those puddles laid mangled bodies, swords littered around them. The chamber had the familiar copper-like odor, but there was another smell, the stink of an unwashed dog. The stairwell was at the center of the room, and I had to step into the chamber to get sight of what was on the other side. I crept out of the stairwell. A crimson puddle splashed around my foot. As if on cue, the mangled corpse began to convulse. Meat and bone shook violently. I stumbled back to the stairwell and watched in horror as limbs began to reattach. The bodies began to shift and rotate, popping and cracking back into place. Spilled organs slid across the stone floor and returned to their fleshy homes. Open wounds resealed. Color returned to the skin of the fallen warriors. The men gasped as their lungs refilled with air. They sat up wide-eyed as if they had woken from a nightmare. Reality hit them as they scrambled for their blades. There was a heavy gallop, accompanied by the sound of claws clinking on the hard floor. For these men, the nightmare was not over. Bounding past the stairwell was the biggest wolf I'd ever seen. More significant in size than an elephant or a giraffe. Black fur wet with blood. A tail long as a bus. Feet the size of cars. The creature snarled loud as a locomotive, then sunk its fangs into a flailing warrior. With a quick whip of its head, the wolf flung the warrior across the room, crashing him into the stone cylinder that housed the stairwell. The warrior landed at my feet with a wet thud. Dead. About 8 or 9 men were battling the beast, and to my surprise, they were capable of sinking their blades into the animal and causing it pain. But doing so only angered the wolf more. I watched as the wolf ripped 2 warriors to pieces. The sounds of bones breaking and flesh being torn from their bodies was nauseating. I slipped out of the stairwell and to the other side. Another body was thrown past me, hitting the ground and sliding to a stop, face down in a puddle of blood. I scanned the chamber for the next door but could see nothing. I searched the floor for any out-of-the-place creases, but again, found nothing. How was I supposed to get to the next level? Slightly to my left, on the far end of the chamber, there was a shadowed spot that the light did not touch. I leaned towards it and squinted. Something was there. A door? I looked to ensure the wolf was still preoccupied and then sprinted towards the shadow. As I got closer, I realized what it was and stumbled to a halt. In the shadow stood a woman. She had long, black hair draped across her shoulders and to her waist. She was tall and thin and wore a dark gown. Her skin was pale on one side, but her left side looked darker. Maybe it was the shadows, I thought. She held out a hand and beckoned me towards her. With hesitation, I approached while paying attention to my peripheral for the wolf. A chorus of shouting and growling echoed throughout the chamber. I reached the woman and could see why her skin appeared to be 2 different colors. One half was pale flesh, the other was decaying and corpse-like. I immediately staggered backward, fearing I'd fallen into a trap.
"Do not fear me,"
she said. Her voice was calm yet piercing. I could feel it in my bones. Her expression was gloomy and lacked any hint of friendliness, despite her assertion. I held my sword in front of me, ready to swing it at the first sign of hostility. "Who are you?" I asked.
"I will lead you to him.
"Who?"
The one who calls for you."
She stepped aside and gestured at a narrow passageway. Its opening was only about knee-high. "That's the way down?" I asked.
"Yes."
I knelt and could see that the opening immediately hooked to the left upon entry. "Lead the way," I said. I turned to check the wolf's status and could see that he was working on the final warrior. I turned back to the woman. She was gone. "Hello?" I said. I crawled into the narrow opening and looked around the corner. A tight space continued curving downwards and to the left. "Hello?" I shouted, but there was no response. I looked over my shoulder. The wolf was staring at me from across the room, breathing heavily. Its eyes were more than animal, more than human even. Its gaze was penetrating and hungry, yet it did not give the impression that it was craving food, but rather a desire to cause suffering. Blood dripped from its large, snarling mouth. The wolf pointed its nose to the ceiling and let out an ear-splitting howl. The hairs on my arms jumped to attention. I lunged further into the passageway and squeezed around the corner. I kicked off the wall into a desperate crawl. There was barely enough space to move my arms. My back kept pounding against the surface above me. Behind me, I heard the sudden shifting of stone. The howling became muffled as the cramped tunnel was plunged into darkness. Claustrophobia set in. In the pitch black, the small space felt even smaller. The walls seemed as if they were closing in on me. My heart was a pounding drum. I propelled myself forward, My mind was racing. I couldn't breathe. I needed to get out. There wasn't any air. I was suffocating. Then there was a noise, movement. It was behind me. The smacking of hands against the stone surface. 1 slap, 2. The third was further away. 4, 5, 6. Back and forth, near and then far. It sounded like a dozen people were in there with me. What the hell was happening? I crawled faster. My body was bouncing off every surface. I didn't care. I had to get out. I tried to yell help, but I could only manage a weak murmur. I was panicking. The sword clanged with each desperate move. My mind was spinning. Hurry, you're running out of time, I thought to myself. The tunnel was getting narrower. There wasn't any light up ahead. Where was the end? My heart felt like it was going to explode. The walls were pressing against my shoulders more and more. I shifted to my side. I could feel my eyes pulsating. My ears were ringing. I dragged myself forward with one arm. It was getting narrower. Fuck! I yelled. Narrower. I couldn't breathe. The walls were tightening against my back and chest. I pushed with my legs. I was becoming wedged. Another strong push with my legs. A sudden jolt of pain rattled my head as I came to an abrupt halt. It was a dead end. I was trapped. No, no, please, no, I cried. Something brushed against my feet. I kicked empty air behind me. I pounded the wall with my fists. Help! I was losing hope. Please, I gasped. How could it end like this? I'd made it this far. I weakly slapped the wall once more. And it opened. I felt the tingle of salt air touch my face. I gulped in a breath. My legs were still wedged, or so I thought. As I shifted, expecting a struggle between stone, my body rolled. I was free. Did the passageway expand? Ahead of me was further darkness. I was unsure of what I was entering, but that smell was like the ocean. Was I outside? Impossible, right? I descended hundreds, maybe thousands of feet below the ocean's surface. Which posed another question. Why hadn't I been affected by the depth yet? I slowly crawled from the tunnel, reaching blindly in front of me. I did not feel anything solid beyond the opening. I crawled a little further, still well aware that something had been in the tunnel with me, and I needed to get out. Further, my body was half out. My balance became unsteady with another reach, and then I plummeted. It was a long enough fall for me to have the fleeting thought of, oh shit, along with the sudden slap of nausea. It wasn't long enough for me to yell or cry. When a person is startled, they don't tend to belt out a scream like movies would have you believe. It's almost as if the opposite happens. Like terror shoots down your throat, frightens your vocal cords, and then jolts your unsuspecting heart. I hit the water like a boulder, sinking deep, fast. I was conscious, and as far as I could tell through the adrenaline, mostly uninjured, but it was dark. So dark that I wasn't quite sure I had opened my eyes. Which way was up? I exhaled some bubbles. I couldn't see, but I could feel. I followed the sensation, kicking my legs and pulling with my arms. I swam towards the surface. It was a long swim and my lungs were aching. Or they were empty. I hadn't had the opportunity to suck in air before the fall. Please don't drown, I thought. Not when you've gotten this far. I reached the surface, coughed out salt water and hungrily inhaled air. I wasn't going to drown. For now, at least. That was the good news. But a faint light had appeared overhead. Not a torch or flame. A white light, like the moon. Reassuring at first glance, but as I peered across the water, I saw that the light glimmered off wet stone walls. I was still inside the tower. My hope was shattered. I felt stupid for expecting that traveling downwards would lead me to the surface. That didn't make any damn sense. And not only was I still in the tower, I also no longer had the sword. I dropped it when I made contact with the water. Fuck! I shouted at the top of my lungs. The feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, and fear had all boiled over into a cocktail of rage. My exasperated roar reverberated through the chamber. I floated in the water, angrily panting. I was tired and frustrated. I wanted so desperately for it to be over. I wanted to see Hannah again. But then I saw something. No, I saw someone. Ahead, someone was floating on the other side of the chamber, watching me. A man, bearded like the others. "Hey!" I yelled out to him. He did not answer. I swam in place for a moment, considering my next move. Should I swim to the stranger or try to avoid him? So far, no one had attempted to harm me, not even the wolf, so why not go to him? But I didn't need to, because as soon as I had that thought, he moved towards me. His head remained above the water, eyes locked onto me. I noticed more movement from the periphery and glanced away from the man. There was a woman too. She was swimming towards me, like the man, same breaststroke and wide-eyed gaze. As they got closer, I realized that the water was rippling more than you'd expect from two people swimming. The water was moving from them like whales swimming across the surface. And that's when I saw how large their heads were. I began to plan my retreat, but to where? No doors or stairs that I could see. The man and woman came to a halt and floated several yards from me. Even from that distance, it was clear that these were not humans, or at least not like any I'd ever seen. Their heads alone were the size of my entire body. Their eyes were large and unblinking, not wide with fear, more like they were staring into my soul. I couldn't find any words. These couldn't be prisoners, right? The man spoke. His voice was a gentle thunder.
"Hell says to take you to the bottom."
What I'd heard was hell, thinking my greatest fear had been realized. "I don't..." Something grabbed a hold of my ankle and yanked me underwater. I was being pulled downwards. I struggled to escape, but I was being pulled too quickly and with too much force. All of a sudden, somebody snagged my other ankle. I was being pulled faster, deeper. They were too strong. I couldn't get away. There was zero visibility in the pitch black depths of the water. Like before, I had been caught off guard and unable to inhale before being submerged. My lungs were hurting once again, and we weren't slowing down. Maybe I was going to drown after all. Then we stopped. I noticed a nearing glow from above. I glanced towards it and could see that the moon-like orb from earlier had moved into the water, was now illuminating my surroundings. Everything was blurry, as was expected, while underwater, but I could finally see. Women surrounded me, all nude, all beautiful. They weren't mermaids, if you're wondering, although at this point I wouldn't have been surprised. These looked like human women. There was a peacefulness. I'd always found being underwater relaxing, an escape from the madness above the surface, calm and quiet. I began to wonder, was I dying? Were these angels? Reality sunk its fangs back into me. I was dying, but first I had to drown, and that wasn't going to be easy. My body began to convulse. My vision began to fade. The temptation to inhale water was growing. Just get it over with, I thought. Breathe it in. As deep as I was, swimming to the surface in time was impossible. I was going to die, and these women were going to watch. I closed my eyes and silently apologized to Hannah and surrendered. But I didn't breathe in water. Instead, air was given to me. My eyes shot open. One of the women had her mouth pressed to mine and refilled my lungs. My vision was coming back. My body was still, My rapid beating heart began to calm. She pulled away and smiled. I looked at the women floating around me and counted 7 of them. The giant swam above, observing, the orb of light between them. Suddenly, my legs were jerked beneath me and I was being pulled to the bottom again. Fear raced back into my mind, but the light was following us and I could still see 2 women were pulling me, making it 9 women in total, not counting the female giant. How were they able to swim so fast? We were rushing through the water. I noticed that the 7 other women were keeping pace alongside us, and above were the giants and the orb following. We were moving like a torpedo through the water. Again, I had the fleeting thought of, why wasn't I being affected by the depth? Going that deep should have been deadly. I could see that we were darting towards a grayish twisting structure that followed the entire circumference of the chamber and then overlapped and went between itself, almost like a giant knot. Then it moved. As we got closer, I could make out exactly what it was I was looking at. I swung my arms fast and wide, trying to get away, but the women were pulling me with too much force. They were dragging me towards a giant serpent. Bubbles raced from my mouth as I cried out in terror. The menacing yellow eyes of the beast hungrily watched us descend towards it. There was nowhere for us to go. The serpent took up the entire rest of the chamber. We were getting closer, and it became clear how enormous the serpent was. More extensive than any whale I'd ever seen. Bigger than the wolf from the last chamber. This had to be the largest creature to have ever existed. Closer, almost touching it at this point. I braced for what would come next. And then it shifted, creating a space in the center. We rushed between the coiled serpent, and I could finally see what looked like an opening in the center of the stone bottom. But it didn't make any sense. How was I going to get out of the water? I would have to go up for air, not down, right? I was being pulled towards a black void. My lungs were aching again. Whatever waited on the other side, I was going to need air again, soon. Finally, we reached the opening. The women let go of me, leaving me floating above it.
Come to me.
I heard from the blackness below, with the clarity one would not expect to hear underwater. Was he in there? The one who awaits upon the throne of blood and bone?
Come to me.
The voice said again. I glanced up. The women, the giants, the serpent, they were all watching me and waiting for my next move. I swam into the void. Thanks again so much for joining me. I do so hope you're enjoying this epic tale as much as I am. Thank you again to Lady Nopeingham, Darek Weber, and SomberPuppet for joining me this week. Be sure to come back next week for the 3rd installment of the series. I'll have even more new voices joining me. But until next time, remember, just because you couldn't see it doesn't mean it wasn't watching you.